For those of you who don't know me, I'm Allison, a former web editor at Tricycle. I'm now just helping out with a few projects, including Meditation Month, and it is so nice to see so many people. Welcome. Of course, I'm here with Scott Tusa, our Meditation Month teacher, and we're just going to be opening the floor up today to questions. But before we get started, I'll just list a few housekeeping items. We are recording this event so that anyone who doesn't get a chance to watch now can watch later, but nobody else's video is being recorded except for the people you see on the screen. So no worries about that. If you need any more information about Meditation Month, of course, you know where to find it, tricycle.org. It's been so nice to see so many of you participate. Say hello in the chat. We're just so grateful for such a nice active group via our comments on social media, in our Facebook page, in our Facebook group, on our Facebook page, everywhere. It's just been so nice to see everyone. So thank you so much for joining. I think we're going to get started. Scott is here to kind of do a brief overview of everything we've learned this month. Then we will open the floor up to questions. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat. There's also a Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You can use that, whichever you like. Just start throwing your questions in and we'll get to them as soon as we can. So thank you everyone for joining, and hand it over to you, Scott. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much. Well, welcome in everyone. And as Allison was saying, we've been, I'm joining in as a guest for this, but, I've been sort of peeking in at the Facebook group and things like that. I'm just really pleased to see people really engaged with the material, practicing, asking questions. And, this is kind of our chance to be more active together, between you and I. So I've been looking forward to this for a while. And I just want to thank you for all of your effort and your practice. I think this is meaningful beyond words. It's meaningful beyond any kind of way we can sum up and say, okay, it equals this amount of benefit for the world. I'm a believer. You don't have to be. I'm a believer that even one person meditating and working on their mind, it's so powerful, because a lot of the time we spend so much energy outwardly, which is important also, right? But if we only do that and we're not spending time inwardly, there's a whole part of not only our connection to ourselves that we're cut off from, but a whole way we can actually benefit the world. So I'm a believer that your meditation is helping the world, whether you think it is or not. So that's what I just wanted to start with. So I just want to start with thank you so much for your practice and engagement. As Allison said, mainly we're going to jump into your questions. So if there's already questions coming in, I'm just going to start there because I'd really like to focus on your practice. What's going right, and what do you want to learn more about? What are areas in the 4 boundless states and in your practice that you're struggling with, and how can I help you with that? That's why I'm here today. I'll say just something really brief, and then we can jump in. The 4 boundless states, they're kind of this interconnected practice. They're not the only practice where you can do. They are a set of practices within the Buddhist traditions for opening the heart, for learning to live with more ease, for learning to live with more interconnection. And then, of course, for people more interested in the path of awakening, they can also help us to awaken into a type of freedom beyond suffering. So I just want to use those different entry points to say, wherever you're coming from, whatever your motivation, whatever your entry point is with these practices, it's welcome, right? So feel free to ask me from any point of view. It's fine. I'd really, like, as I said, I just really like to know how we can go deeper in this. That's my main purpose. So Allison, I think we could just go for it. And, as people ask, hopefully more questions come in.
Yes, definitely. As your questions occur to you, keep them going, keep them flowing. Okay, I will just get started. So the first question is, Scott, can you speak on the relationship between compassion practice and forgiveness?
Sure. Yeah. Um, yeah, I saw this actually come up in a Facebook post in the group, and I was reflecting on it actually too. I didn't comment there, but I thought it would come up here, so I waited. Um, well, I think maybe we have to talk about compassion first and kind of get some ground there. Of course, like, the videos were a certain amount of time. I'm a pretty talkative person. If you all don't know that yet, you'll learn that. So like it was actually hard for me to stick to kind of like a 10-minute mini Dharma talk and then a 10-minute meditation, because I could have gone on for an hour for each, but that's just not something probably you would have watched. So, so it's better to keep them short. But what I wanted to say, what I mean by that is that there's really a lot to say about compassion, especially coming from the view of Buddha Dharma, and that means like compassion. We could say, of course, it has things that link into other types of spiritual paths. Also, just secularism, all of that is linked, and we could kind of say on a non-religious level, compassion is just a base, a basic innate quality of all beings, right? So we can even just take religion out of it completely. But nonetheless, I think Buddhism has a lot to say about it, not as like some kind of belief or some kind of way where we need to become Buddhist, more like people who are really taking it seriously and trying to bring it to its more absolute sort of ultimate space that has the most benefit and the most freedom. So compassion, unlike loving kindness, though they're related, right? They're like siblings. Compassion has this element where we are training in, to the best of our ability, slowly. It doesn't have to all come at once. Our ability to bear witness to what is uncomfortable for us, what is uncomfortable in the world, what is uncomfortable for others. But along with that, as well, we're bearing witness, we're also kind of coming in with the attitude we want to see what is going to shift that situation for ourselves and others. But we're not doing it with our thinking mind. We're doing it via this innate quality of compassion. So it's a very different way to work. We need some patience for it, because it's not obviously like immediate solutions are not necessarily going to come all the time, because we just sit and we learn to sit and we learn to, through bearing witness to uncomfort, pain, suffering, whatever we want to call it, stress, we can find tools for, again, as I said, not breaking down from it, but breaking open into what we call insight in Buddhism. So compassion can actually be a type of insight practice as well. Basically, what I'm saying is it can help us when we're able to work with it and grow with it and practice it. We can open up into a kind of wider wisdom that's inaccessible by the thinking mind. I just want to say that, because I think in the modern world, we're kind of habituated to this idea that all problems need to be solved by the thinking mind, and that the thinking mind can solve everything. It can solve some things, but it can't solve everything. So compassion is this other approach. So when it comes to compassion and forgiveness, I think for me, it's more that it's that slow, deliberate process of attuning to my own stress in a different way. Now, attuning to it doesn't mean we become it either, right? Attuning to it doesn't mean we are, how do you say it, dwelling on it. So there's a real distinction here that we need to distinguish in our practice. We're not becoming it, but we're also not rejecting or dissociating from bearing witness to something. So there's an area there that's really interesting to explore. So once we're kind of clicking with that, and some of us do need to connect with teachers and other resources to help us connect with that. Once we're connecting with that and that's growing, it's like another part of our humanity comes online. Maybe a part for some of us, like myself, was missing, or maybe it was there, but we can enhance it. We can bring it out more. Then from there, it's sort of like, I don't know. It's easier to see that all beings are struggling. It's a little bit easier to see there's no real enemy in the world. There's just a lot of us really confused about what causes happiness. We're trying to deal with life, and life is more or less a struggle, not all the time, but it has struggles. Maybe I'll put it that way. And so I think forgiveness comes out of this natural process of just seeing that others are not different than ourselves, that others are also going through similar things, maybe in their own way, but the human experience is kind of universal. And then we soften towards others. And I find that it's easier to forgive others because I can see there's a being here that's struggling, instead of like, oh, this being here that did me wrong or did this or caused harm. That could also be true. We're not necessarily, this is where I think compassion and justice are a whole interesting conversation, right? How do we have justice in a compassionate way? Compassion doesn't mean we're apathetic or we just let harm happen and go unnoticed. No, we have to respond, but we need to learn to respond from compassion. And that takes a process of working with it. So that's what I'll say for that question. Forgiveness for me really comes out of that. It comes out of seeing that at the root is a person, whoever I think did harm, or there's something that I need to forgive them for, forgive myself for, that there was some fundamental confusion going on where they were probably trying to get some kind of happiness for themselves or someone else, but they got confused and stepped on me or other people along the way, which was harmful. And so we're acknowledging the harm, but we're also recognizing it's coming from somebody who's confused. Now, that's something you're going to have to reflect on. It's not something you need to believe right away. And I would argue that if we're able to connect with that compassionate essence I was talking about, that is not dwelling on the pain, but we're bearing witness to it over time in a process of meditation, and we're breaking open to that, from that space, we can approach the person in the way I'm talking about. So it comes as a natural response, not as a decision. I want to make that distinction. It's not like, oh, now I'm going to be this compassionate person. I think that's a waste of time. I mean, it's a nice thought. It's a nice thought thinking, I want to be more loving, I want to be compassionate. Because that's an aspiration. In Buddhism, we work a lot with aspirations. So that's nice. But when we initiate it, we can't expect ourselves to be that person right away. It takes time, right? And it's entering a process that's really confusing for most of us. But what else are we going to do? We're already confused. We might as well work with something that has some track record. These practices I'm sharing with you, the 4 Boundless states, they have 2,600 years of research and development. To me, I kind of trust that a little bit more than things that only have maybe 10, 15, 20, 50 years, or even modern science, about 100 years plus, maybe 150 years. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Sorry, I was just collecting myself. I'm taking notes. Thank
Oh,
you.
and I just want to put a caveat. I trust science for other things, but not necessarily to help me grow compassion. But it can too. So I want to be careful here with my words.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that question. Thank you for that thoughtful answer. Just move right along. Let's see. I'm going through a phase of having a hard time settling into my daily meditation. Today, I'm wondering about space and what finding inner space means.
Sure. Yeah, so there's kind of different levels of inner space, the way I look at it. We could say like the most profound level of inner space is what we call in Sanskrit Tathagata, but basically it refers to Buddha nature, refers to our innate awakened nature. And the most profound inner space is someone who's brought that to its fruition. We normally call that person a Buddha, an awakened person. So Buddha in Buddhism doesn't refer to only a person. I hope some of you know that. It refers to the principle of awakening that all of us have the potential for. So that would be the most profound level of inner space, because there's nothing left to uncover. It's all been uncovered. But of course, most of us are not there yet, or even close, myself included. So, I think there's these other levels on the path that we're working with. Maybe a first level for some of us, especially when we're having trouble settling in meditation, is a level of opening up some space in the body. So I typically focus on that a lot with people who are struggling to settle in practice. I have a lot of other guided meditations. It would be like another course, right? So I have courses and other guided meditations on that, separate from what we're doing here. But I think I did a little bit of that in the guided meditations, but basically learning how to settle in the body, that's important. And there's some techniques and stuff that help that along when we're struggling with that. That's a kind of inner space. But in Buddha Dharma, kind of the inner space that's that we're really looking for, and that kind of once we're able to settle and feel grounded in the body, or we're moving along in that, then there's the inner space of the mind. And that has two kind of paths that we work on, concurrently or sometimes a little bit the first one, and then before we move into the second. These two paths are, the first is developing a kind of stableness in the open quality of nowness, right? We typically call this meditative awareness or shamatha in Sanskrit. We're developing a kind of inner space that's open to the moment, but there's still a subject and object. There's still a meditator and something we're meditating on. That would be kind of that kind of inner space. But, you know, we all need to go through that doorway. We all need to develop meditative awareness. But in the Buddhist path, meditative awareness is then used for insight meditation, or vipassana, as some of you know it. And vipassana isn't a technique. It's many things, actually. Many things can become vipassana if we know how to use it skillfully. And that's for opening up into the inner space that liberates us, the inner space that frees us from duality, essentially. We could say like duality of subject to object, duality of good and bad, duality of right and wrong, duality of, how do you say it? Either nothingness or something, you know, existence or non-existence. And that's what the Vipassana practice helps us to do. So that would be that genuine inner space. And when that inner space is perfected, for lack of a better word, or uncovered fully, that's what we call a Buddha. So yeah, but you can all explore that. I'm just kind of giving you different levels. And for many of you here, I'm guessing that first level is going to be the one you need to access. Just developing a little more space in the body. So that's what I was recommending. Just go to my website. I got a bunch of stuff on that. Yeah.
We will drop Scott's website into the chat. Thank you. And thank you for that answer. Okay, let's see. A couple questions that might be good to do in sequence. The first one is they're kind of on like emotions, like anger and dealing with people who, you know, feel hostile toward each other. So the first question is, I'd love more detail on meditating with emotions like anger or frustration when giving them space feels like a failure. How to be more kind and welcoming with a hard day.
Yeah, good question. Again, I'm a big fan of practicing and gaining facility with the feeling world when it comes to emotions, because emotions have, you know, the quality of mind where we, you know, they're connected to stories that we weave, they're connected to thoughts and thinking that we have, as well as memories. And then there's a component of emotions that are felt, right? That are something that is in the feeling body. And so I'm kind of a fan of starting there, right? Because so many of us, myself included, we're kind of addicted to using the thinking mind for everything. And like I said, the thinking mind's great for a lot of things. Actually, we could say like a lot of the marvels of the modern world, especially like modern medicine, for me, there's a lot of marvels there, a lot of really beneficial things for human beings. That comes from the power of using, you know, the thinking mind in a skillful way. But the thinking mind is not so helpful with emotions, because a large part of emotions are not thought, they're felt. So that's where I was recommending kind of going more into embodiment techniques, learning how to meet them in the body, to open up space to be with them in the body. And so typically, like I said, I have a bunch of content on that, but you know, my main teacher, Sonia Rinpoche, he has a practice called handshake practice, and I guide some meditations on that. But of course, I highly recommend you go to the source, which is him, and he has a great book called Why We Meditate. Also, he has we have a course called Fully Being. I also help with that, and it also goes into a lot of detail on these techniques for how to meet difficult emotions in the body, right? Because of course we need to meet them in the thinking mind too, but the problem is a lot of us, we're heavy on that side of thinking. We don't necessarily know how to meet them in the body in a healthy way. So I focus a lot on that in my mentoring work, but of course the source is Sonia Rinpoche, so I recommend also going to him.
Thank you. Thank you all for submitting such great questions. We have quite a few, so I'll just keep going.
Yeah.
So yes, the next question is, how do you approach two mutually hostile groups with compassion and justice?
Yeah, well, the justice part is really tricky, so I'm gonna save that for next. So we already kind of talked about the compassion approach, which is, allowing ourselves to bear witness, growing the facility to bear witness to it really starts with our own stress. It starts with our own challenging emotions. It starts with, this word is tricky, but yes, our own suffering, but of course that's a loaded word. It starts with learning how to do that in a skillful way, like I said, where we're not completely hijacked by the pain, stress, suffering, meaning we're not becoming it, but we're also not dissociating or rejecting it. So this is the kind of space we find, like I keep recommending, embodied meditation, really does help us to do that. I just don't have time to go into the details of the practice. That's why I'm pointing you to resources you can find after this. Um, so so that's kind of one area. If we're able to do that for ourselves, that's going to trigger over time a softness towards others, which is more your question. Like when we see two groups fighting, not, for me, a lot of the times when two people or two groups are butting heads, there's also a worldviews that are incompatible, or there's worldviews that are not being recognized. Meaning, like this side could have a certain idea or worldview that they think everybody should function from that place, but this side has their own and disagrees with their worldview. And when those clash, it's tricky because no one's willing to acknowledge that their worldview is not primary, you know? So again, we can't force that on anyone, right? But what we can do is to, like I said earlier, hold others in a space of compassion, because butting heads in itself is actually, from a Buddhist perspective, it means there's some fundamental confusion going on. It means there's some misperception. It means that actually, in one way, we could say when people butt heads, it actually means they care, because this side cares about what they're passionate about or angry about. This side also cares, right? But they're also making an enemy of the one who doesn't care in the way they do, right? Or doesn't care about what they care about. So the reason I say that is because we can start to soften our view around these groups. I mean, most of us actually, we usually side with one group. So that's another problem. That's where equanimity practice is really helpful, because we're starting to see, there's no, how do you say it? Everyone's kind of motivated by the same wish for happiness and to avoid suffering. Does that make their views equal? It doesn't, right? So that's where justice comes in, right? And that's a tricky one. So again, how much time do we have, to talk about justice? I think justice is cultural. So it's very tricky because, you know, um, how do you say it? If the justice can be a way for reconciliation to happen, I'm just thinking of some stories of the Buddha and how the Buddha enacted justice between maybe students or his followers, who are having trouble, or even, Devadatta, for some of you who know the story of the Buddha, he had a cousin who hated him and tried to kill him on multiple occasions. I don't know. He didn't call the police. He didn't, call the army. He didn't attack Devadatta. But that's a Buddha, right? So, he's able to flow with that and able to work with that in a different way. When we're talking about society, that's when it gets tricky, because we all have to organize it in a certain way. So I definitely don't have the answer for that, obviously. But I think justice has to come with compassion. It can't just come with right and wrong. It has to come with seeing the basic fundamental worth of everyone. And then, of course, working these things out is really difficult. So I think that's the last thing I'll say, and we can move on. But if we're obsessing over a problem, whether it's our own or it's a problem in the world, and we're just obsessed with I think it's better to work with compassion. It's better to focus on that, because I'll give you an example. I can get obsessed with things, and if I'm obsessed with it, it's not necessarily solving it, especially if it's two groups that I'm not in. I have even less chance of helping that necessarily. So it's not saying we shouldn't do things outwardly. We should when we can, but we need to take a step back, and then we can be skillful about it. That's really what compassion is about. It's about developing the skill to approach our interconnected relationships with more ease and with more wisdom, right? Because I think sometimes we might think we know the right answer, but when we look deeper, or we maybe we get our way, doesn't necessarily always go the right way. So this is a really tricky one, So yeah, compassion, justice needs to be informed by compassion. That's the start.
Nice, thank you. We also have a few kind of more direct technical questions about the meditations that we've been doing this month. So I'll just kind of switch into that gear, and then we can see what else comes our way. So the first one is about the term, I'll just read it. A question came up for me about boundless and boundaries. How to be healthy, maintaining boundaries, and thinking about being more boundless.
Okay. Good question. I apologize, I have a cough because I've been sick for weeks and I just have this cough that won't go away. I know it's annoying to listen to. Okay, so maybe we can go back to something I already said, and this relates to boundlessness. I don't see boundlessness as something we can initiate like flipping on a switch. It's a process we have to build into, and we grow to be boundless. Right? Or we could say, like, as we enter the process of developing loving kindness and compassion in this deeper way, what happens is we grow into a process of how that becomes more boundless. So boundlessness can refer to both like the loosening of who we think we are and who we think the other is, right? That's one way to talk about boundlessness, basically like spaciousness that develops. And I like the word fluidity, like more fluidity in relationship and in relationship to ourselves. And then the other way to think about boundlessness is the object, like those we are cultivating compassion for or loving kindness for. And that is for a boundless amount of beings, right? And so in a way that's not meant to overwhelm us, that's meant to break open the conceptual mind. It's actually used as a skillful means in Buddhism, meaning like if beings are numberless and my aim is to interact with them in a compassionate way, it's sort of like, how do you say it? It sort of breaks open our need to accomplish. It breaks open our need to do. It breaks open our need to become something. I would say it eventually, the deeper we go in the Buddhist path with these practices, it also breaks down even our need to be a saint in some kind of way, or even a good person. And it's a little controversial. Be a good person, right? like that's fine. But eventually we have to get over that. That's also a kind of trip, because sometimes being a good person gets in the way of acting on behalf of others in a compassionate way, right? Again, that's kind of a deeper end subject. So that's the boundless side. And then, yeah, what was the, sorry, I just forgot the other part of the question. If you can read it one more time.
It was just about finding it, how to have healthy boundaries, how to maintain healthy boundaries.
Got it. Yeah. And
Thinking
boundlessness.
about being more boundless. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes we just got to get clear. That's why I started with boundlessness. So that actually, how do you say it? That boundlessness, when we're getting more clear conceptually about it, it gives us a way to aim the practice. That's all it's for. The practice actually becomes less and less conceptual, meaning like we're just transforming, right? As we practice and we work the process of developing the four boundless states. And then it develops into this kind of boundlessness, either a relationship to others and a relationship to our own fluidity in relation to others and ourselves. Then boundaries, those are just temporary things we need to function, right? So boundaries are either a temporary measure we need to not sort of fall into constant overwhelm, or I could say like stress that sort of we're incapable of working with at this moment, right? But I think all of boundaries change. They're not static. It's not like we keep the same boundary our whole life necessarily. Actually, I would say, I don't know. I think as we develop these practices, pretty quickly, like we start to question our boundaries, and then we realize, oh, I don't need that so much, with that person anymore. Like I'm okay. I can deal with the stress of this. I can work with it with more love and compassion, and just being open to that. But this also is like a skillful means of recognizing we have to be kind of in constant relationship with our boundaries. And so we don't just set it and forget it. It's something we're relating to. So for instance, in Buddhism, actually, there are boundaries too. We have things like precepts. So we have things like don't kill, don't steal, um, try not to lie about things, try not to harm others through sexuality, things like that. Those are boundaries we put up. Why do we put them up? We put them up so we can look at the mind. Of course, we put them up because we don't want to harm others either. But we also put them up as a mindfulness practice, because once it's up, we have to look at it. We have to interact with it. And also we're going to ask questions. Well, why? I mean, most of us are not going to ask questions. Why not to kill? That's kind of obvious. But some deeper ones, like part of some of the precepts or 10 non-virtues, are like avoid craving after things that aren't yours, like craving after other people's things you want. So, some people that might be obvious why that causes suffering, but it actually is a boundary that causes us to look back at our mind and to look back at how clinging causes suffering. So it becomes a tool to wake up. It becomes a tool to gain more insight, to gain more fluidity. So I think boundaries at best should do that. Or for some of us, we need boundaries just to function because it's, like I said, it's too overwhelming or stressful. So yeah, that's what I would say about that. I mean, boundaries are natural, but I think it's also good to kind of aspire that at some point, maybe not this life, but at some point we can be boundaryless. I mean, I don't know, but it's just a hypothesis. I think enlightened beings, they set boundaries, but they're only for other people. They have nothing to do with them. But they might set a boundary for another person as a tool to wake that person up, not as a tool to like diminish them. So I think for most of us, it's a little different. We set boundaries because we get overwhelmed and we can't deal with that particular situation. So we put a boundary. And then, maybe it's for the other person as well, but also there's some kind of self-involvement, which is fine where we are. But if we put it, we need to keep it like in our corner. So every time we walk out of the door, we got to look at it. That's my recommendation. And reevaluate is essentially what I'm saying. So.
These are such good questions, such great answers. I'm so glad we're recording this. So I don't have to take notes. This is really helpful. Thank you all. Okay, another question about these practices we've been doing this month. Someone says, I have practiced meditation before that usually begins with the self first. And the loving kindness meditation you led does not begin that way. Is there a reason?
Yeah, I mean, you can start with yourself. Typically, we don't do that because, this is kind of like maybe a cultural thing that like typically I think, I don't want to be generalized too much, but in pre-modern cultures, I don't think they struggled too much generally with whether they love themselves or not, or there was some confusion around that. Actually, also we also love ourselves. Otherwise, why would we feed ourselves? Why would we come to this? I mean, coming to this or doing this meditation month is a form of loving yourself, actually. It's just maybe it wasn't conscious, just something you wanted or thought was interesting. But actually, from a Buddhist perspective, we would say it's because you like yourself. It's because you care about yourself that you do it. But then there's these other issues culturally where we often struggle with worth. We often struggle with confidence. We often struggle with a particular modern ailment that is, how do you say, a type of hollowness, a type of not enoughness. I've personally had to work with this, right? That's why I keep recommending somatic embodied practices. They really help me to work with this and to sort of heal some of these wounds. I consider these cultural wounds. So in that way, sometimes we need to focus on sort of allowing ourselves, how do you say, loving ourselves first as a way to work with that type of wound. But actually, it's not really, in my view, it's not really a problem we don't love ourselves. It's a problem we don't actually know our worth, right? So it sometimes doesn't get at the root problem. It depends on the person. And also, I'm sure you noticed in my meditation, there was a focus on receiving care. Do you remember that? I focused a lot on like opening to receiving care. And you notice what happened? A lot of people struggle with that. I noticed in the Facebook group. Why? Because it's really hard, because that actually works with the more not enoughness piece, right? So for me, if we're going to do loving kindness for self, my preference or my recommendation is do more of that. Allow yourself to be open to receiving love from others. Like, practice that. That's hard for a lot of us. And we can work with that. And that can be a process, because that opens us up to like that we are actually worthy of love. Because I think that's more the fundamental issue. So traditionally, I think you can argue different ways. Traditionally, also Tibetan Buddhism, we don't focus so much on, we don't take that interpretation from the sutras that the self needs to be loved, because culturally in pre-modern cultures that was already there. You know, that's kind of my argument here. And again, this is just one way to think about it. It's not the way. I'm just providing you some of my opinions on this. But I think it's better to just go straight to working with that wound of hollowness, not enoughness, etc. And once that's worked with, it's easier to just feel okay with oneself. And then from there, we can do traditional loving kindness, starting with these three kinds of figures, right? Likable, dislikable, indifferent.
That's great.
Otherwise, loving kindness. Sorry, this is a little. I'm in this mood. I just was at Verizon for hours and hours and hours the last 3 days, so I've been kind of like just trying to get a cell phone to work. But sometimes we run the risk of turning a Buddhist practice into a self-help practice, and it won't have. I'm not saying that's bad. So before you write in the comments here, I'm not saying that's bad. That won't. But what it does is it limits it, and it won't give us the full breadth of what the practice can do for us. And sometimes that's subtle, because a lot of us need help, right? But self-help is something different. It's something kind of, how do you put it? It's very popular, all the things that go in that category, and they can be helpful. But I think there's some other things that then go unrecognized when we go that route. And so I prefer kind of opening up another conversation. So that's just my, preference. Doesn't mean it has to be yours.
Thank you. That was a really helpful way to look at that. Okay. Let's see. Another question about these practices, and do you think it's important to reach out to a person you've had difficulty with, someone you've been meditating toward, and try to make peace with them?
It depends, that's a tough one. I'm kind of the notion that it's not necessary, but if you can, and there is a willingness also from their side, like, that's important too. We don't want to assert our will on someone else. Maybe they don't want to see us, So if there's openness from their side, I think it is good. Like in Buddhist ethics, we would say it's good to create that kind of reconciliation where, at least there's like mutual respect. I think that's the main thing. We don't have to necessarily like someone, but we don't lose our respect for them. Because if we lose that respect just for their basic humanity, we lose a deeper love, which harms our practice, which harms our heart, So yeah, it's kind of not a clear-cut yes or no. It's just like, depends on the situation. And then also, I think there's room to love from a distance. There's room to send care from a distance. Just some people, also some things are really, we were just talking about boundaries, right? So this is important. Sometimes, yeah, the boundary is skillful sometimes, depending on the person. Like if someone's not beyond or not knowledgeable about the harm they can cause, and we put ourselves in that situation, and we're not ready for that, it could go in a chaotic direction. So it's kind of needs to be thought about. But I think I will say this, I think through working from our own side first and opening it up, I have a good Dharma friend who said, I love this example. It's sort of like, if you think of a rubber band, in order for there to be tension in the rubber band, there needs to be two sides holding it, right? So like this is one side and this is the other, and all that tension in the rubber band. But if one side lets go, there's no tension anymore. So kind of that's, the start, which I hear you saying in the question. That's the start. We work from our side there, and we're working on letting go of our side of the rubber band. And once that happens, actually, sometimes the energy changes in a situation. And then this person kind of also opens. And then there's room to reconcile physically or verbally. But sometimes there's not. But the main thing is we need to work on our side of releasing the rubber band. Yeah. Otherwise, it's a lot of suffering for us. No, very painful. Not a way to live.
They're bringing up lots of questions for myself, but I'll hold them for,
It's a tough
because
one.
we it is. But we have a lot of other questions that I will go to first. So the next one is a question about joy, which is what this week is about for meditation month. So the question is, some teachers teach it as sympathetic joy and others as our joy. Sympathetic joy is, as I understand it, being happy to see other people's joy versus being jealous of their joy. Can you clarify this? So yeah, this is what this week is about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's coming out today, right? The video? Cool.
Yes.
So yeah, I think I answered in the video. I think I can't remember exactly, but I think
Yeah, you
I
did.
answer your question. But yeah, I'll just say briefly. Yeah, I'm focusing this week more on sympathetic joy. That's what the video and the guided meditation are on. Yeah, that's the way generally, from more lineage-based Buddhism, we would interpret the fourth boundless state, or actually it's the third, but yeah. Yeah, so focusing, yeah, it really does help with jealousy, but it also helps with some other things. For me, sometimes I have a block to loving kindness. It's like just hard to feel warmth towards others sometimes. And then joyfulness just does it for me. Like I just remember, oh yeah, my neighbor who's playing loud music also wants to be happy. Like, why would they be playing loud music if they didn't enjoy it? So I could switch from being angry that there's loud music to taking joy. Wonderful. Like, I'm glad they're enjoying that. And wow, there's like so much loosens, all of my tightness, all of my, aversion starts to melt a little bit. Not every time, let's be honest, but over time. And then like loving kindness is more available too. So generally joyfulness just helps our mind to loosen around getting tight. And then of course it helps in our relationships because we're not just, we're not such a stick in the mud. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a great way. It's I know it's the last one that we're working with, and you obviously explained at the beginning of the month why we started with equanimity, but having done a little bit of the joyfulness practices, I've find it, I don't know, it's kind of an easy one to access comparatively, I think. But I know everyone
It's
will have
hard. It's harder when it's harder for me when it's trying to have sympathetic joy towards something we're having aversion towards. That's where
right.
the practice goes eventually. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good lead into the next question. So, the next question is, recognizes that throughout the weeks you've mentioned that maybe it's not right for everyone to start with someone we don't like. I'll just read the question again instead of paraphrasing. You've talked about the three different types of people to work with, and you've made a point on not working with a difficult person right away. When do we know to try dropping that person into the practice?
I think we know. I mean, I do recommend. I'm not sure if I said this in the video, but I do recommend working with a situation that challenges us or causes us aversion. The problem I've seen with like mentoring people and teaching people over the years is like for some reason our minds, as soon as someone says like work with a dislikable person or situation, we go to like the worst, like the hardest person, I don't know why we have that, maybe that the mind does that. I'm not sure why. But anyways, so what I recommend is like actually we kind of have to like backpedal a little bit, like take our foot off the gas when we notice what our mind is doing. And we have to kind of think really, work with thinking of like something really minor, right? And usually those minor situations happen with people we love close to us, right? So for instance, like, oh, what my partner, move my shoes from there to there. Now I got to walk over there to get them. Everybody can relate to that kind of stuff. I mean, maybe I'm just a whiny, like complainy guy, but I think we can all relate to, especially people we live with and we're close to. It's like they're gonna rub us the wrong way, but they're not our enemy necessarily. But for a moment, we feel, that grip of annoyance, that grip of impatience, that grip of slight aversion. So when we can work with that, that's when we can take on, to answer your question now, when we can work with those situations and open to them and bear witness to them, we can then work with more difficult people. Actually, for me, it's the opposite. So it does, like, I can work with like just throw me the worst person and I can work with them in the meditation. What I can't work with is people who piss me off in these small little ways. So I have kind of the opposite problem. But I think generally the spirit, it depends on you, right? But generally the spirit of what I'm saying is like, take it smaller and slower. Someone who, it doesn't have to be someone, it can also be a situation. Like for me, I don't know about you all, but it's sort of like, if I got mad at a couch, it was like, we stub our toe in the couch and it's like, damn couch, but the couch isn't a person. We could start with things like that. I don't see why not, because what we're working with is our habit of aversion. And aversion, it's a spectrum. Not all aversion is like full out anger. A lot of it is just like a little bit peeved. I don't know. We have lots of words for this in English, like annoyed. Work with something that annoyed you. Like that's why like traffic things are really good, because pretty much when I get in a car, I'm pretty much annoyed. It doesn't matter, you know, unless I'm on like a road in the mountains or something. If I'm in a city and I'm in a car and I'm driving, I'm annoyed. So we can work with some of those things, but you're going to have to find yours. So in a way, what I'm saying, I don't want to give it to you. What I'm also saying is like exploring those things is an act of insight meditation. Like thinking about, reflecting on, well, what are these like little slight annoyances that I don't notice throughout the day, but they happen? We start to become more aware of our experience. So meditation in Buddhism is more about becoming more aware of the fullness of our human. Actually, I don't want to be a little, no, I don't give you too much bad news. Initially, it's actually working with our uncomfort, but not to feel uncomfortable, to open up our relationship to that. So that's sometimes also what we refer to as insight, these moments of noticing how the mind is. And then because we noticed it, we have the opportunity to shift it. If we don't know it, we have no opportunity, right? It's like I have a lot of blind spots, and my partner is like one of the best people in my life for pointing those out, because she sees me day to day. So, God, I mean, if I didn't have that, I would just be like, yeah, I would be lost in a certain way. So knowing our blind spots is helpful, but as a meditator, we have to be our own partner. We have to be our own one who's like willing to look, but not because we're deficient, not because there's something wrong with you or us. It's because we love ourselves. Wow, I got balloons. It's because we love ourselves. It's because we care. That's why we do this. So anyways, just some different ways to think about it. How do I turn off the balloon thing? Oh, reactions. Yeah.
What did I do?
It was me. Yeah, it's on the Mac.
Thank you for that answer. So we do have time for a few more. It's 10 to 4, but let's just keep going. Another question relating to the practice specifically. I have a hard time understanding or reconciling the fine line between equanimity and letting joy in. Could you help me distinguish between receiving joy and happiness and non-attachment and equanimity? I often feel guilty when faced with joy.
Oh, like whether we can experience joy or not? Is that more what the question is?
I think so. Yeah. I think the last line, I often feel guilty when faced with joy. Like, how to get around that.
Yeah, there's not really an issue with the 4 boundless states, just to point it out, because you'll see in this week's video, it's more we're talking about sympathetic joy, taking joy in others, happiness. I think what you're describing in this question, I mean, I'm going to take a shot at it. Obviously, I'm just trying my best. I'm not exactly sure. Is I think you're referring a little bit more to like what I was talking about earlier, which is a little bit more related to how we relate to ourself, like how we relate to our innate worth, or the lack of that, how we relate to, enoughness. I think it's more connected to that, because I mean, and also joy is a complicated word, because a lot of people mistake joy for excitement. Joy isn't necessarily excitement here. That's a different thing. And so I'm leading a weekend retreat in California right now. It actually came up yesterday in some questions about the difference between, because, you know, I think something common when we approach the Buddhist path is in the beginning is we think, oh, well, we can't be happy about anything in it. Like if we're trying to cut attachment and clinging, it means we shouldn't be happy. Not at all. Actually, we can be more happy. It's just, it's like most of our happiness is very conditioned and it's based on sort of like, do I have something or not? And then it goes into the realm of more like um, dopamine hits, like excitement, which from a Buddhist perspective, that keeps us locked in the wheel of stress eventually. Because it's sort of like we have the high, so we got to have the low. But that doesn't mean we're trying to become an even robot. Instead, as we start to see truth more in our meditation, as we start to open up to our Buddha nature, as we start to open up these four boundless states, as an example, we can just experience more well-being in the form of joy. But it's not like excited joy. I never met any great Buddhist masters who were like excited joy, but I met a lot of Buddhist masters who are really, really joyful people, like really joyful. And I think the basis is they don't have this issue so much with enoughness. They're okay with themselves. So that's what I was saying. Some of us have to go back to those practices. I was describing embodiment and different things to heal some of those wounds. And when we can connect with okayness a little bit more, then through, you know, other meditation practices in the Buddhist path, we can start to open up this wider joy that comes from being free. I think a lot of great Buddhist masters are joyful because they're free. Their monkey mind is not leading them around anymore. You know, they're not beholden to every single challenging emotion that arises. They know how to work with the ocean and its waves. They know how to work with emotional. It's not like they don't have emotions. They know how to work with them in a skillful way. They know how to free themselves. So that's where like the genuine joy starts to come from. I don't know. Yeah. Anyways, I said a lot of things. Hope some of that relates, you know, to what you're struggling with.
That's super helpful. Thank you. We have just a few more minutes, and we actually have two questions about incorporating these four heart practices into daily practice. I'm trying to see. Is this something that okay, the second one is easier, so I'll just start with that. But how do you remember to practice like throughout the day off the cushion? And then I guess folded into that is, do you do these heart practices off the cushion, like in your daily life? Yeah.
Yeah. There's kind of two ways to think of it. For the second part of the question is what we grow in the process of growing our connection to these four boundless states in formal meditation, we eventually reap the fruits of how that transforms us in our conduct in the world, right? So again, going back to like, it's not something, we don't have to become something different. We don't have to conceptualize like what it would be to be a good person. We just become a more loving, compassionate, you know, equanimous person. But that takes time. For most of us, years, to be honest. It's not like an immediate thing, meaning time of formal daily practice. And then eventually it will spill out, as I like to say. It's like we can't hold it in for long because it'll spill out in the best way. And so until it spills out, like, so I do recommend having a formal practice of it, but until it spills out more into your life, of course, remembering the principles of the practices themselves. We're working in a way a little bit more analytically through the day, where we might remember, like when there's a dislikable person, we remember some of the principles we were working with in formal practice. This is kind of how like formal practice supports bringing it into the day, because in formal practice we churn it and we go a little bit deeper because we have more quiet space to do that. And then that gives us facility that when we're in the day to remember how to do it. So there's no like, you want like a strict structure. It can be as simple as just remembering warmth or connecting back to, like, for me, like I said, sometimes I do have some problems with warmth, but generally I can sort of generate it, and not in like a wow type way. Some of these things are really subtle. It's like, it's okay. The warmth is kind of like, you know, it's just a little something, you know, little finger popping up from the ocean. Hey, you know, like that's fine, and we're happy with that. Or for instance, with compassion, for me, the way I'm bringing in the day most of the time, like I said, I start here with my reactions, and I allow, and I meet them in the body. But I don't recommend that for everybody right away. We need to, meaning if we have strong trauma, that's not the first step. But, I've been working with that kind of practice for 15 years. So it's there, it's available to me now. And so I start there, and then I might start to attune to the others and the environment, and or if I'm watching the news or whatever it is, and just allowing myself to bear witness to what reality is happening right now, to people's reactions. So that's how I generally practice it in the day. So for me, I guess what I'm pointing out is like simple ways that are doable, kind of like where we flash into these things. We flash into warmth, we flash into compassion, we can flash into sympathetic joy, and based on equanimity. So yeah, that's how I would recommend it. Was there another part to the question? I can't remember. Was that it?
No, that was, I think that was sufficient. Thank you. I really like when a couple times in the meditations you recommended that we use phrases that are like just feel like natural to us when we're, picking a phrase to direct to someone. That really kind of made it easier for me, and kind of throughout the day as well. Just, and then when that phrase kind of popped into my head in the middle of the day, without consciously doing it on purpose, it reminded me that, oh, I'm practicing. Okay,
Good. Yeah,
so
that's great.
we have 2 more minutes. I'm going to throw you one more question, and then I will let you wrap things up however you'd like, Scott. So
Cool.
the question is, or the statement, I have what I call fix-it drama, where I feel I need to rush into fixing a problem. This can redirect my experience of compassion in this practice. Can you say anything about that?
Yeah, I think we should start a support group together. I'm in the same boat. I think it's part of our human tendency. I mean, of course, everyone has their kryptonite here. You know what I mean? Like, mine is I can't get into my phone. Like for me, our phones are like our life is there. So it can be easy for me to kind of immediately go into like, emergency mode. Of course, health things, I think for most of us would be the area, or health things in our family or with partners, like that could be your kids. Those are obvious. And, I think we just, in general, we need to have the discernment for like, what is an actual thing that requires immediate action, and what is something we can learn to pause with, you know? And pause doesn't mean reject. Pause means like how we can turn to be with it, as opposed to, because for me, as opposed to rejecting it, because for me, when my fix it mentality comes in really strong, it's really because I'm trying to get rid of it, whatever I think the problem is. So I think I just want to say that there needs to be discernment for, obviously, some things we need to make immediate choices about, and we just have to try our best. But a lot of the times, myself included, I'm kind of getting into fix it mode with things that just don't need to be fixed right now. And so I try to sit with the feeling of that. Because for me it's usually an anxious feeling. It's a feeling of like needing to get up and do something right away. It's also kind of a lack of patience for me, not necessarily the person asking the question, but for me. So having some kind of practice, developing a practice of sitting with something, the most beneficial thing, I think, in my practice. And there's many ways to do it. That's why I'm not giving the technique here, because there's multiple techniques. But these techniques for that have been some of the most helpful things in my practice over the years. 100%. Yeah.
Well, thank
So
you.
we'll stop there, Allison.
I
Yeah.
think so. But as I was just chatting, everyone, don't be a stranger, reach out, visit Scott's website, scotttusa.com, which we've dropped in the chat. Find us at our website, trischool.org. I know many of you have been active in our Meditation Month Facebook group. It's not too late to join if you want to participate. Scott has also been active. So thank you so much, Scott, for being participating in there. I think you know where to find us, but we'll send out this recording. You can also watch it on YouTube in a day or two. And yeah, Scott has a lot, a lot going on. He's leading this retreat right now. He's got, courses on his website and always coming up. So definitely, continue to follow him and stay in touch. And, you'll be seeing him with Tricycle as well. So, we're just so glad that all of you, joined us for meditation month. It's been really wonderful. I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions today, but again, don't, find us another way and we'll get back to you. So I'll just mention one quick event that Tricycle has coming up, because it's this week on Wednesday. If any of you are interested, we are teaming up with, it's hosted by another organization called May We Gather. Go to Tricycle's website. I'd encourage you to check this event out. It's something a little different, and it's with a kind of national group, I think, that's based in on the West Coast, and it's interesting. So you should check it out. So the May We Gather event on tricycle.org. You should take a peek, see if it's something you can join us for. And again, go to Scott's website, go to our Facebook group, go to our website. We're just so glad that all of you joined us today. So Scott, I'll let you have the final word, but thank you so much for answering these questions, Scott.
Yeah.
It's been great.
Thank you, Allison. And thank you even the big Tricycle team. I think it's been a really rich experience for me, and just seeing everyone's practice, as I said, and just makes me happy that we're spending our time on this. There's so many things we could be spending our time on that do not produce genuine well-being. So I think to me, I believe this does. So I'm just really happy about that. And as Allison said, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to support you in your practice. And just keep going. Keep going. Don't quit. Just keep going as best you can. Even 1 minute, 5 minutes a day is better than nothing. And learning how to integrate it and being open. I think for me, curiosity and openness is one of the biggest tools, because it keeps us engaged and passionate and asking questions. I think answers are kind of boring sometimes because they stop us. Instead, I think more questions are good. And I don't mean literal questions. I mean asking ourselves questions, exploring the practices in different ways. So I just encourage everyone to stay curious. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you soon.
Awesome.